So the other main focus we had in WebDocs was forms. Now in the past, are any of you in the room familiar with eForms? Do you use eForms at all, or no at this point? Probably not. In the past, an eForm, so if you've got documents you're constantly making copies of, that's where you take advantage of eForms. You make those hard copies digital. They're born digitally. They never go to paper form. You can make those into electronic forms. The other example I always use is we've got a lot of folks that use WebDocs for HR purposes. They'll put an actual, what we call an external facing eForm on their website, call it an application. I want to go to apply for a job at DMI. I'm going to hit their careers link. I'm going to be presented with an application. When I fill out that application and hit submit, that's going to submit into WebDocs and maybe go down a new hire process. So you've got external facing eForms that you can use too. There's a couple different types of forms that we have now in WebDocs 7. So in the past, you've always had these structured forms. I can make, I can make an HR application. I can make an I-9 into a structured form. Why? Because they all look the same. They all have the same look and feel. They're easy to create structured forms with. What we've added in WebDocs 7 is now this new web form. So whether it be, I created some forms for an HVAC company that wanted to have their service techs fill out a form when they go perform fix on an AC or a furnace, and they want to present the customer with something to sign off on. That's a web form. It doesn't matter what device I'm on. The web form fits to that device to make it easy to use instead of the structured form where if I pull up a structured form on an iPad, I may be doing some zooming in, zooming out, trying to pan over, find the difference. It's not intuitive. Structured forms are not intuitive. Web forms are. And I'll show you an example of both. You've got the two different types of ways to submit forms, whether it be structured or web. There's a submission piece where I can actually hit a submit button at the bottom of that form and it kicks into my WebDocs system. Or I've got just view edit form. So maybe I'm in the Matt Johns HR file. I just want to generate an I-9. That's just a view edit form. I'm not submitting that to kick down a workflow. I just want to view it, fill it out, save it back into Matt Johns' file. And I don't want to emphasize this too much, but within both these types of forms, you've got what we call regular and responsive. Again, that's where you can make it fit to whatever device you're accessing that form from. Structured form, I touched on it a little bit, and I want to kind of skip over this slide because I don't think it does a good job, but I-9s, invoices, those are all things you can make into structured forms. Those don't change. They got the same look and feel. They can be HTML forms. If you've got Excel spreadsheets or Word documents, you can make all types of e-forms. It doesn't have to just be HTML. We can actually make Word documents or PDFs into forms. So when I go look at that document, it still looks like it's in Adobe. It still looks like a PDF, but it's actually an e-form that submits into. Again, some examples. Here's an example of a structured form. Notice it's kind of hard to see that grid, but it all kind of looks and feels. You can break it up. It's very predictable. Here's an example of a health insurance claim form. You can break those up, and they all look, feel somewhat the same. Now, when we talk about web forms, what we've done in WebDocs 7 is in the past in version 6, you would have to know some sort of HTML to create e-forms. You'd have to create an external e-form with HTML. You'd have to create an internal e-form with HTML. It was messy. It took a long time. If you didn't know anything about HTML, which I don't, I could never create an e-form. I'd have to pass it to our IT department and say, hey, make this I-9 into an e-form. That's not the case anymore. We have what we call an e-form designer, where I can literally drag and drop stuff onto this designer here. If I want to put in a label and call this a work order, and then I can drag and drop text lines onto this, date fields onto this. I can drop a signature thing onto this. So in the example of my HVAC company, they want the customer to sign with their finger on their iPad. So I just drop a signature stencil onto this designer, and it creates that for me. I don't have to know that HTML to program that into the e-form. Web forms are HTML, and I'll show you what that looks like here. So again, just the different types of forms that you submit in. It's an application on a website. When I hit submit, it kicks off the workflow, and just the view edit type of forms, I-9, stuff that I'm just going to change, save, it's stored away inside a WebDoc. I'll show you this real life, but this is what we call the forms portal. So we now have a service. So when you create forms, you can save them on your own portal to access those forms. I'll skip over that because I want to show you that real life. Here's an example of just doing a view edit form. I'm inside a file. I can generate a form right from within inside the file. It's just going to be a view edit file. I'm going to fill it out, and it's going to store it inside of that file. A lot of these forms can be generated through workflow automatically. So I talked about filling out an application and hitting the submit button. Well, when I fill that application, I hit the submit button, it goes down a new hire process workflow. But it also, when I fill that application out, it generates a host of other forms that I need to hire Matt Johns. It's going to generate my IT checklist form. It's going to generate my electronic consent form. We have it in the background where we can automatically generate forms for you instead of manually having to go in my file, generate an IT checklist, generate an electronic consent. It can all be done in the background. Just a screenshot of kind of what it looks like to name those web forms. I'll show you this real life. We've got web or structured, so I talked about that regular form not fitting to the device you're using. You know, if you're on a PC, that's the way it's going to look. If you're on an iPad, it's not going to fit on that. You're going to have to be panning around, zooming in, zooming out. Again, if you're on a smaller device, an iPhone, it's going to be even tougher to use a regular form. That's why we've come up with responsive web forms. It doesn't matter what I access this form on, it's going to fit nicely on that mobile device. The forms designer, this is what I had showed you earlier where you drag and drop stuff onto that designer to create your form. Before I do that, it presents you to name your e-form. What type of form are you using? Is it going to be submission or regular? And then, submission or view edit? And then do I want it to be a regular form like an I-9, or do I want it to be responsive, something that's going to change on the device I'm using? And we also give you, before you create a form, you can start with a blank canvas to create your e-forms. But also, we've got a host of templates out there. So if you want to create an emergency contact form, we've got one out there. Now, you may have to modify it just a little bit to make it your own, but it gives you a good start to that e-form. And then lastly, just a couple of different options in the designer that I didn't show you. You can, and I'll show you this real life, but you can add buttons, check boxes, a spot to upload a file if I wanted to upload a resume on an external e-form. Here's just an example of some radio buttons you can put on your e-form too to check one or multiple. So let me go show you the forms in real life here. So I want to show you an example of, I'm going to use that, the example of the HVAC company that we created some forms for. So if I go to my portal, notice the URL is just your URL/portal. It's going to present you with the different types of forms that you created. And I'll create a form for you too, but want to generate one of these forms for you first. So notice I have a couple of different forms that I've made. I want to go to this work order form, this work order in my work order project, and I've got a work order request form. So let's go back to that HVAC company. In the past, what was happening was people were calling in, somebody on the phone was answering the call, hey, what's wrong? My furnace is broke. Okay, let me get out my piece of paper, take down your information. I'm going to go walk it over to the service manager. He's going to dispatch somebody out. So what we've done using forms in the forms portal, if somebody calls in, that person on the phone will go to the portal and fill out this information on the fly. Or in the case of this organization, this form actually lives on the Matt Johns HVAC company website. So I don't have to call anymore. I go online. I can view this work order request right from the website and fill it out and not have to worry about calling somebody on the phone. So let me just walk you through an example. We've got Tim Barnes. A second. So in real life, maybe my furnace is broke. I went to Matt's HVAC website. I want to get somebody out here to fix my furnace. Put in some dummy information here. I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. Oh, AC broke. And I'm going to submit this in. Now, somebody gets notified via email that, hey, somebody has submitted a form on the website. We need to be able to dispatch somebody out to fix Tim's furnace or Tim's AC right away. So that's submitted in. Now if I go into my WebDocs, if I go to my assignments, notice I've got a couple of work orders actually that I need to take care of down here. I've got some invoices, but I also have some work orders, and I can go just to my work orders if I select this option over here. So let's open up this work order. There's my Tim Barnes II. As the first person in line to get this form, I can go in and double check the information is right before I send it to that dispatch manager. You'll see down here this has been kicked off through a workflow. The next step in this workflow is to send it to that dispatch manager. So as that first maybe customer support person, I can say, okay, do we have all of Tim's information to be able to dispatch somebody out to see him? Looks like we've got the street address, his description, his email address, and his phone number. You'll also notice we're capturing some other information on this as far as when I submitted that form in, when I actually dispatched somebody out, and when that service is actually done. This particular organization wanted to be able to maximize the time their service reps are out in the field. So they want to see, hey, is it taking them 2 days to get to this house? Is it taking them 4 days? How long is it taking them to do the actual service? How much time before somebody calls in or somebody fills this form out to the time we dispatch somebody out? How much time are we wasting? So we're able to capture that information to maximize really everybody's time in the office. So, yep, everything looks good here. We need to send this to the dispatch manager. Somebody needs to go fix Tim's AC. Notice I'm prompted. This is a kind of a workflow check that we've added to say, hey, do we have Tim's phone number? Because a lot of times, this dispatch manager will actually have to call Tim to maybe get some more information or to see, exactly what is wrong. So, yep, we do have his information. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And just like that, it's kicked off now to the dispatch manager. Now, keep in mind, in real life here, everything's coming right back to me, so I have to log in and log out as the dispatch manager. But maybe I get notified that, hey, a customer service rep has reviewed the information. There's somebody that needs some work done. Go properly send this out to the service tech. So I can click on the file, say, okay, we've got Tim Barnes. He needs some work done on his AC. His information looks good. Where does he live? Because I need to get this out to the appropriate tech. He's at 546. Perfect. I know the perfect service tech that's in that area. I'm going to dispatch that to him. So I'm going to hit my dispatch button, and I'm presented with my service tech. I know that, Greg Smith does a great job with furnaces, but doesn't know a lick about AC. Don't know why we hired him, but I'm not going to send any AC work to Greg Smith. So I'm going to send it to the appropriate service tech in this case. Now, I want to send it right back to me, so I'm going to log in and log out these different people. But, yep, the administrator's perfect at fixing ACs. Let's send it to the administrator. Now, you'll notice I talked about the difference between view edit forms and submission forms. That first form I filled out was a submission form. It kicked off this workflow. But when I dispatched this out to my service tech, it created, in the background, a work order. So here's the work order request that I had originally filled out. Notice I now have a work order. This is what the tech's going to use and present to the customer. Why? Because it created a view edit form in the background. Now, if I scroll down, I still got all the information that was originally filled out by Tim online, but you'll notice down here, now I can fill the information out that I need to as the service tech. Description of work, labor, parts, materials. I can have the customer sign down here. So let's say I go to Tim's house, I fixed his AC, and just needed a cleaning. We are not expensive. And I also needed to give a brass fitting. And the cost of that fitting was $10 for an invoice total of $60. Now, a pretty simple example here for you, but hey, Mr. Customer, I cleaned your AC. I also needed to put a brass fitting on that. Would you please sign agreeing to the work that was performed? I'm going to use the mouse for this, but this is where they could use their finger to sign that on the iPad or Android or whatever device they're using. Yep, looks good, Matt. Appreciate the work. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, this work is complete. I'm sitting in my van now. I've done the work. It's going to prompt me again some different workflow. This is actually a validation stencil that we put in our workflow to say, hey, don't let Matt pass this to my accounting people to process until I have 4 pieces of information: the work order, the customer. We got to make sure I got the customer signature. I don't know if you can see that very well in the back, but it's saying, did I obtain a customer signature? I did. Did I gather a check? I'm going to say I did for this for purposes here. And did I attach in a receipt? You put on a brass fitting. Did you put the receipt from Home Depot on there, how much it cost for it? The work's done, looks good. I've collected all the information. I'm going to pass it on to our billing department. So you'll notice down there at the bottom now I have two options for billing. I want to send this to my accounting package, or I want to return it to the service manager if something's wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and send it to accounting. Now it's going to prompt me, hey, did you get the customer's check? Before we send this to our accounting package, we need to make sure we have that check. Now, we also had the service tech verify he had the check. Well, maybe the service tech lied and we didn't make it required. He didn't actually get that check. If I hit OK, it's not going to send it to my accounting package. It's going to keep coming right back to me and say, hey, do you have a check? I do. It's still not going to pass it because over here on the left-hand side, there's no check. So let's just add a check and pass this along in our accounting system. Let me go upload a document. I want to upload a check. Now, in real life, what would happen here is the person in accounting would call the service tech and say, hey, you said there's a check here. There's not a check. Why don't you take a picture of that check on your iPad and upload it right from your iPad out in the field so I can process this work order. So I read you loud and clear. Let me take a picture of the check. Perfect. The check is in the system now. You should be able to process it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Notice we do have a check now under Tim Barnes' file. And I can now pass this to my accounting package. So, yep, we do have a check now. And now it's on to the next step, which is waiting export into my accounting package. So, for those of you that don't use or maybe use our integration platform, WebDocs can also integrate into accounting packages to pass data to and from QuickBooks or Great Plains or whatever it may be that you're using for your accounting package, so there's no double entry. You could set it on are you talking like a mobile? Yep. We've really put a focus on making everything mobile. As Bill mentioned, we all have iPhones, iPads. We want to not be in the office. We need to work everywhere. So we've really put an emphasis on making that as easy as possible in WebDocs to be able to do that. So that's an example of a submission e-form, creating a view edit e-form in a practical usage that is currently being used today. Now I want to show you the creation of that e-form, and then we'll take a break here. So how do I make an e-form? What you're going to do is you're going to open up your central administration. For those of you on WebDocs 6, you're probably used to the central administration being up here in the top right-hand corner. We've moved that down to the bottom left-hand corner. Why? Because most users don't access the central administration. They're not making changes to projects, or they're just using the system. They're viewing documents, passing documents along a workflow. So we put that in the bottom left-hand corner. Again, all designed to make it a more engaging experience for each end user. So let's just go ahead and create a form. I'll show you how easy it is. Let's just create I've got a webinar. I know you probably can't see, but I've got a project here called Webinars where I host or house all the people that sign up for our webinars, all their information. I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to go to there's an eForms node down here. And notice I'm presented with, I can create a structured eForm, an I-9, or I can create a web eForm, a work order form, or webinar form. So I'm going to go ahead and create a web form. Notice if I click on my library, I don't have any forms created here. So I'm going to add an eForm. It's going to ask me to log in because, again, you don't want everybody to have rights to do this. So the first thing it's going to ask me is, what do I want to name this eForm? I want to call this the webinar registration form. What type of form is it? Is it a submission form or a view edit form? I want this to be a submission form because I want people to get an email on their mobile device and say, hey, sign up for this webinar, and have them fill that information out and submit it in so I'm notified when they're registered for that webinar. Now, what sort of layout? Again, people are going to be viewing this invitation on their mobile devices, so let's make it a responsive form. Here's where I talked about the different templates we can use. If I've got something here that looks like it might work that I just need to modify, I can start right from here. In this case, let's just do a blank form. Now, here's where it gets really cool. Here's where I can just drag and drop stuff onto my forms designer, and it's going to create that HTML in the background. I don't have to know anything about HTML. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a label on this form. I'll drag the label icon over, and we're going to call this the webinar registration. and I'm done. I'm going to go back to my toolbox. What else do I want to put on this form? Well, let's put a checkbox on here, and I want to put a couple options. I will attend, and I'm going to add another radio box that I will not attend. I'll probably make this checkbox tiny. Save it. So as easy as that, I'm able to add checkboxes, links to upload files, whatever I want to do. Here's where I can put my signature block, drag and drop the signature block. So if I want, in the example of that HVAC company is to collect the signature, I just do that now. In the past, if you guys aren't familiar with eForms, it was kind of labor intensive to put a signature box on an eForm. It required knowledge of HTML, Java, stuff like that. No longer it's drag and drop, and I'm just going to leave it at that. The last thing I'm going to put on here is a button to be able to submit this in. So I'm going to drag a button on here, and you know, I can have it be a save button, print button, reset button, whatever it may be. I'm just going to leave it at save. Now, if I want to actually see the HTML that was produced in the background, this is what you would have to do in the past to create this eForm. I'd have to open up, whoops. Here's what that would look like to create this eForm. I would never be able to do this. People would spend a lot of time doing this to make that eForm look the way it does, but that's no longer drag and drop. You're on your way. I can preview this. Let's see what that form is going to look like on my website. And lastly, just some options in the form. So here's where I can add properties to this form. So when I submit this form, what do I want it to do? Do I want it to go down a workflow? Typically you do. But just some options here on this eForm. Probably the most important option is you've got this portal option here. Here's where I can just select that box to add it to my portal. So if I add this to my portal, I can now access it much like I did when I generated that work order. So I'm going to make it public. I can add security around these forms and secure by an access code or a login. But I'm going to add it to my portal and hit my save button. And I'm just going to go ahead and save this webinar registration form. Now, what you're seeing here is a prompt that says, Matt, you don't have any of these mapped index fields inside of WebDocs. I don't care. For this purpose, I'm not going to map those fields. Now, if I go back to my portal here, oops, in fact, I think I have it saved. I've got a link to my portal saved. Here's my webinars project. Notice it now has my webinar registration form, so I can access this online now. That's what it looks like. So if you're not using forms, it's easy to use forms. I suggest with WebDocs, this is one easy thing that you can add to make a lot of your processes much more efficient without having to know anything about HTML or have to waste time creating eForms. It's